Hi everyone, thanks for joining me in the kitchen again. I've got a bit of a sweet tooth today, so I think I'm gonna make some chocolate chip cookies. I don't have any eggs, so I'm gonna make these vegan style, and this recipe uses an egg replacer called aquafaba. And aquafaba is just a fancy French word for bean water, which basically is what it sounds like. It's just the water left over in a can of beans. So, like, chickpeas is what people usually use because the flavor is pretty bland in the water. Any type of white bean works pretty well. When you open the can up, instead of pouring the water down the drain, pour it into a little baggie, and I usually just freeze that, and then I can pull it out whenever I want to use it. About 3 tablespoons is about 1 egg worth, and it works really well. It doesn't fry up like an egg, but it thickens things, and you can use it in any type of baking like an egg. And it also whips up into a meringue like an egg, so you can do pretty much any type of meringue toppings and stuff vegan with it. It's pretty amazing stuff, because it's just stuff you would usually throw away. So yeah, pretty much anytime I open a can of beans now, I tend to just pour all the water into a baggie and I'll freeze that, and then I use it in all sorts of different types of baking and dessert. This is actually kind of loosely based on a recipe that we found over a Facebook group called the Facebook Vegan Meringue Aquafaba group. Um, it's been around for a few years now, and it's kind of just a place to share recipes and stuff. It's kind of where the stuff aquafaba first started getting popularized, and a lot of recipes kind of got shared around. I'll link to that, and it'll give you a pretty good idea of how to follow the recipe. This is a few variations on it from that, but it's pretty close. This is going to be a pretty big batch too. I'm going to make a double recipe, and it freezes pretty well, so I'm going to make enough to fill a couple of cookie sheets, and then I'll freeze the rest and use that in a couple of weeks to make more. Let's start off by going over the ingredients. This is the aquafaba, and it's kind of the consistency of egg whites, kind of a viscous type liquid. This is bread flour. It's 2.5 cups, and this is kind of a mix of a dark brown sugar and a white granulated sugar. And I used this sugar, which is another thing I like to do. I'll put some vanilla pods in a jar with a bunch of sugar and just store it, and the sugar preserves the vanilla pods, and the vanilla pods flavor the sugar. I'd use it a lot in coffee and stuff. Instead of those little flavored vanilla creamer things, I just use a spoonful of that. It gives the coffee a nice vanilla hint. And in baking and that type of stuff, I'll use it to kind of supplement other vanilla flavoring. It just adds an extra nice kind of fresh vanilla flavor to whatever you use it in. If you don't have that, just use regular granulated sugar. This is 1 cup of dark brown sugar and half a cup of granulated sugar. This is 2 teaspoons of vanilla flavoring I'm also going to use. Going to use a cup of butter. This is a vegan butter made by Earth Balance. I've got 2.5 cups of chocolate chips. I'm going to use half and half baking soda and baking powder. A teaspoon of each, and half a teaspoon of salt. And that's pretty much it. I'm going to take my vanilla and I'm going to pour it into the aquafaba here, just so I have my liquids combined. And then I'm going to throw this in the fridge just so it's nice and chilled when I mix it in and I don't melt the butter a little bit on accident. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is get all my dry ingredients combined. So I've got my flour here. I'm going to add a half a teaspoon of salt. A teaspoon of baking powder, and a teaspoon of baking soda. Alrighty, so to start off, we're going to cream the butter with the sugar. So I'm going to add both my sticks of butter into my stand mixer here. So I'll just kind of go at a low setting, start butter mixing, and just going to kind of gradually mix the sugar in with the butter here. You want the butter to get a little bit fluffy and the sugar to all be well incorporated. You don't want lumps of unmixed butter or unmixed sugar. As it starts to combine more and you don't have as much loose sugar, you can turn the speed up a little. So yeah, as this goes, you might just let it mix for a couple of minutes. You don't want the butter to melt. That looks pretty well churned. If it does seem like it's starting to melt, you can throw it in the fridge a little bit at this point and let it chill back out. Alright, so next thing I'm going to do is mix in my liquid ingredients. And then as that's mixing, we'll just kind of gradually start to add our flour mixture in. And then once I've got all the flour mixed in, I'll just kind of gradually add in the chocolate chips. Now you might find you like 2 cups of chocolate chips a little better than 2.5. This will be pretty chocolatey, but I like it that way. And then once everything's mixed together, we'll kind of scrape this off. And then we'll throw this back in the fridge to chill for like half an hour or so. You don't necessarily have to do that, but it's kind of hot today. This is starting to look a little bit soft. I don't want the butter to melt too much. Best thing about this chocolate chip recipe and why I like doing it this way even when I do have eggs is you don't have to have any regrets about eating this raw. So that's pretty much it. So I'm going to throw this in the fridge and let it chill for like half an hour or something like that. And then we'll start making cookies. So here's that cookie dough. It's been resting in the fridge for 45 minutes or so now. Definitely has thickened up now a bunch more. So I'm just going to basically take spoonfuls of this and spoon it out onto my cookie sheet. You can play around with the size. I've found big cookies do work pretty good with this recipe, but I tend to like them kind of medium sized. Just make sure you keep them spaced apart because they'll spread out a bunch. And just going to use 2 spoons to form them into balls. Try to keep them fairly consistent in size, but it doesn't have to be really critical. And I did grease these cookie sheets, a little bit of coconut oil. I kind of like the flavor that gives to them, plus it has a high temperature, so it's a good one to use for baking. Alright, so I got my cookies formed. This will be 12 cookies, kind of medium sized. My oven's still preheating at the moment, so I'm just going to set these aside. Now I made 12 cookies worth that I'm going to bake. That's one batch. I could just keep rotating and doing more batches as one finishes and cools. I'll cook another, but I've got enough cookies for now, and after a few days they're not nearly as good. So what I'm going to do, I've found this freezes pretty well. So I'm going to freeze it and then use it to make more cookies in a couple of weeks without having to make the dough and everything. So what I like to do is roll it out into a little cylinder, and then you can just cut the cylinder into little pieces that are basically balls that you can then throw right on your cookie sheet. So I'm going to use some cling wrap. With the amount I made, I'm going to make about 4 of these little tubes, and then I'll throw them all in another little baggie to freeze. So once it's kind of in the cling wrap, I just kind of roll it up like it's a sushi roll almost or something. I try to get it about the same thickness down the tube because, like I said, I want to be able to just kind of slice this into little bits that I then just throw each little bit as a ball onto the cookie sheet as a cookie. So I want it to be about the thickness that when I cut it into circular size pieces, they'll be about the right size for a cookie. So right around an inch thick tube or so. And then I just kind of use these to portion it out into the amount that I'm going to want to unfreeze at once. So this will probably be enough to make another dozen or so, and then that's about the amount that I can bake at once, so it works out pretty good. Then I just kind of twist these off, and when I have 3 or 4 of these, I'll throw them in another Ziploc baggie and throw them in the freezer. Okay, so I got 4 sausages of cookie dough made. And I'm going to throw these in a Ziploc bag here to actually throw in the freezer so that they're sealed off a little better and won't get freezer burned and stuff. And I've usually used these within a few months of when I made them, but they've been fine for that long at least. Alright, so I'll throw this cookie dough in the freezer. So my oven's preheated to 350. I'll throw my cookies in, and I'm going to give them 12 minutes. So we'll check back with you when they're done. Alright, so timer went off. I gave these a couple more minutes. Yeah, they're looking better now. These cookies, I think, were a little bigger than the recipe called for. I gave them about 14 minutes altogether, but they're like good now. A little more golden colored and not as greasy on top. Make sure before you try to remove them from the pan, you let them cool down for maybe 10 minutes or so. You want to let them solidify. When the grease is still pretty hot, they'll might crumble or fall apart. So I'll let these sit here and cool off for a minute, and then we'll move them over to a little wire rack. About 10 minutes since I took these out of the oven now. They're nice and cooled down. You could eat them right now. Let them cool off a little bit more before you try to put them in a bag or a box or something. But yeah, so it's as easy as that. And since I froze that cookie dough, anytime in the next month or two that I want cookies, I just pull one of those out and slice it up into little 1-inch bits, and it's as fast as just warming the oven up. Yeah, and these are all nice and yeah, it's delicious.